The rain tapped against the tin roof of Gin's shack like a cruel reminder of the world outside gray. It's cold and merciless. She sat on the dirt floor, her baby pressed against her chest, his tiny body trembling with hunger. His cries had softened into weak whimpers, the kind that broke her heart more than the loud sobs did. A hungry baby eventually stopped crying, not because the hunger ended, but because hope gave up. That silence terrified her more than the noise. The small bowl beside her was empty. Just hours before, she had boiled tree bark and weeds, hoping to trick her baby's stomach with bitter water. The neighbors had done the same. Everyone in Hyasan lived this way now, half-live, half-dead, waiting for famine or the Korean soldiers to decide their fate.
I dead yet.
She rocked him gently, whispering a lullaby her mother once sang to her. The words tasted foreign now, songs of spring, flowers, and warmth. What spring? What flowers? All she knew was the smell of damp soil and the constant ache in her belly. But in North Korea, hunger wasn't the only thing that killed. Silence was survival. Gion dared not complain. Even within her shack's thin walls, she feared her own voice. Neighbors were eyes of the regime, trained to report even whispers of discontent. A wrong word could bring the knock on the door, the boots that dragged families into the night never to return. She looked at her baby's face, pale and thin, his lips dry. She traced her fingers across his cheek. "Stay alive," she murmured. It wasn't a prayer, words were forbidden. It was a command, a desperate plea to her child and to herself. Memories of her husband flashed, his strong back as he walked to the mines, the soot on his face when he returned. One day he didn't come back, collapsed in the tunnels, they told her. No funeral, no body, no last words. Silence. Now, she carried the weight of 2 lives hers, and her child a sensed, a system that allowed neither to breathe. The rain grew heavier. She pulled her shawl tighter and pressed her baby closer. Hunger had hollowed her body, but love kept her spine unbroken. For now the morning fog clung to the streets of Hyzen like a shroud, hiding the desperation etched on every face. Guyan wrapped her baby tighter in her ragged shawl and stepped cautiously into the black market. The smell of wet mud mixed with burning coal and stale rice hung in the air. Every footstep on the slippery ground was a gamble, one wrong move. One glance and a Korean soldier could appear. Demanding bribes or worse, she carried a small bundle of rags she had sewn from torn blankets, hoping to trade them for rice or corn. Her baby's tiny fingers clutched the edge of the shawl, and she felt his soft warmth against her chest. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine a world where he could eat without fear. Then she remembered the market's whispers. Traders spoke in hushed tones, glancing around as if the very walls had ears. "Did you hear?" One woman muttered, "The Kimjong River border is swarming with soldiers." "Last week, a family vanished for trying to cross." Another added, "They said she hid a potato for her child, shot immediately." Gion's stomach clenched. One misstep could mean death, and yet she had no choice but to be here. She approached a man selling a small heap of rice. His eyes flicked over her bundle, and then back to the shadows, where Korean soldiers patrolled silently. "How much for these?" she whispered. The man's voice was barely audible. 3 pieces for 1 scoop. "Be careful," he said, pressing the rice into her hands. Gian clutched the precious grains, her heart pounding. I felt the weight of every hungry neighbor who might see her and covet it. Every parent in Hyason knew the same unspoken truth. Survival was a silent war, fought without weapons, only cunning, courage, and luck. As she turned to leave, she noticed other mothers, faces hollow and hands trembling, carrying scraps to feed their children. Some had bruises hidden under their sleeves. Others carried buckets of water from the distant river. Despite the fear and suffering, they moved with quiet defiance. Each act a small rebellion against the system that sought to crush them. Gion pressed her baby to her chest and whispered, "We must survive, little one. Must." The rain began to fall again, and the market, with its shadows and whispers, became both a danger and a lifeline of fragile thread, connecting her to hope, however thin it might be. The sky was a thick gray sheet when Gion joined the throng of villagers, marching toward the town square. Rain-slick streets reflected the harsh lights of flood lamps, and puddles rippled beneath the boots of Korean soldiers patrolling every corner. Today was a mandatory rally, a spectacle of loyalty to the regime. Every citizen had to participate or risk punishment. Gun held her baby tightly, the infant's warmth against her chest the only comfort in a sea of tension. Round her neighbors stood stiffly, faces pale and eyes downcast. Mothers pressed their children to their sides. Fathers gripped the hands of trembling toddlers. No one spoke. Every gesture was scrutinized. Every frown or hesitation could be a death sentence. As the parade began, blaring speakers demanded synchronized claps, chants, and bows. Guion moved mechanically, bowing with the precision she had practiced 1,000 times. Her baby stirred, his tiny hands brushing against her wet cheek. Panic struck her heart. If he cried, if she faltered for even a second, the Korean soldiers would notice. Some families had been publicly punished simply for a child's whimper. She felt the eyes of a soldier scan the crowd, sharp and unyielding. Every bow, every clap, was a performance of survival. Jion's legs ached, hunger gnawed at her stomach, and cold seeped through her thin shawl. Yet she kept moving, pretending loyalty while praying silently that no one would see the exhaustion etched in her face. Round her, children mirrored the motions of their parents. Faces pale, mouths silent, hearts learning fear before they even learned freedom. She glimpsed a young boy whose cheeks were streaked with tears he dared not wipe. A mother nearby clutched her baby so tightly the infant's small cries went unheard. For Jian, each gesture was more than obedience. It was a calculated act of survival. She whispered to her child under the shawl, "Stay quiet, little one. We are invisible. You must be invisible." The rain fell harder, soaking the crowd, turning the square into a slippery stage for fear. Yet amid this theater of terror, Guion's heart beat defiantly. Even in obedience, love could not be silenced. When the rally ended, soaked and trembling, she returned to the narrow alleyways of her neighborhood, gripping her baby like a lifeline. The Korean soldier's eyes followed, lingering, unblinking. Survival was not just living, it was moving through shadows, pretending, bowing, and praying that no one ever saw the truth inside her heart. The darkness of the night pressed against Jian's shack like a living weight. She lay on the floor, baby pressed to her chest, shivering from hunger and cold. The rain had stopped, but the mud outside had hardened into treacherous ridges, making every sound outside echo like thunder. She thought of nothing, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart, when suddenly a sharp, violent knock shattered the silence. Her stomach lurched.
Visitors were rare in Hyezen.
But a knock at this hour almost always meant danger. Slowly, trembling, she rose to the door, the baby squirming against her chest. Through the small crack, a shadow moved. One Korean soldier, his eyes cold, searching, judgmental. "You!" he barked, stepping inside before she could react, boots splashing in the puddles that had seeped under the door. "Why were you so slow at the rally?" Your bow looked fake. Guion's pulse raced. She opened her mouth to explain, but words failed her. Hunger had hollowed her tongue. Fear froze her lips. The Korean soldier moved through the shack, overturning pots and pans, scanning for hidden rice or money. Each overturned pot echoed like a drum of doom in her chest. She instinctively pressed the baby closer, his tiny body trembling against her own. "You think you are clever hiding food for your child?" the soldier sneered. Gin shook her head silently. She had nothing to give. The baby stirred and she muffled his cries with her shawl, terrified that even this innocent sound could be used against them. Arzor maybe minutes passed. The soldier's glare pierced her, as if he could see her soul. Finally, he spat on the floor, shoved her aside, and stomped back out into the night. Guion sank to the floor, sliding against the wet wood.
House.
Her hands shook violently. Her baby whimpered softly and she whispered, "It's okay. You survived. We always survive." The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Outside, the wind howled through the broken shutters, carrying the distant echo of Korean soldiers' boots patrolling the streets. Hunger, fear, and grief pressed upon her like iron. But under it all, a fragile flame of determination glimmered. She would keep her child alive, no matter the cost, no matter the cruelty, no matter the world watching her every move. For Jian, survival was no longer about herself. It was about the small, fragile life she cradled. The heartbeat against her own, the only reason to endure another night in North Korea's merciless shadow. Jian awoke to the sound of her baby coughing. Wet, rattling sound, that made her stomach twist in fear. His small body burned with fever, skin flushed and damp with sweat. Her heart pounded as she pressed him closer, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his fragile chest. No medicine. The local clinic had been raided months ago, leaving nothing but empty shelves and broken promises. She wrapped him in her thin shawl and paced the floor, whispering to him, "Stay with me, little one. Please, stay with me." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to calm her own panic. In North Korea, weakness was dangerous. Crying was a luxury no mother could afford. One neighbor's wail could bring Korean soldiers knocking on doors, dragging families into the cold night. Desperation clawed at her. She boiled herbs she had learned to use from her mother, dried leaves, roots scraped from the mountains, hoping their bitterness could soothe her child. She fanned him gently, murmuring lullabies through the haze of fever and exhaustion. Every sound outside, a boot striking the mud, a dog barking, the creak of distant doors threatened to pull them both into danger. Jian's body ached from hunger, yet she forced herself to eat nothing, giving her last crumbs of rice to her baby. Each grain she swallowed was a refusal to let him starve. She watched his tiny fingers clutch at the air, weak yet determined, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. She remembered her husband's face, soot-streaked and exhausted from the mines, his voice promising that they would survive. Now he was gone, claimed by the tunnels and silence, leaving her alone with this tiny life. Every fevered breath her baby drew was a reminder of what was at stake. Hours passed in a haze of anxiety and prayer. When the fever finally broke, Jian felt a surge of relief so intense it brought tears. She quickly wiped away. Hunger still gnawed at her, exhaustion threatened to pull her under, and Korean soldiers' patrols continued outside. Yet as she held her child close, breathing in his faint, sweet scent, she felt a tiny ember of hope spark within her. Love had kept them alive tonight, and love might just carry them through another day. Days passed in a haze of hunger and fear, each one blending into the next. Gian watched her baby sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling, and a storm of thoughts swirled in her mind. The whispers of the neighbors haunted Hersum had crossed the river into China, escaping the suffocating grip of Korean soldiers. Others had vanished, captured before they could reach freedom. The border was both a promise and a threat, a razor-thin line between life and death. At night, Jian paced the perimeter of her shack, memorizing the sounds of patrols, noting the timing of Korean soldiers' footsteps. Every shadow became a potential threat. Yet, with every cautious step, a fragile ember of hope glimmered. She imagined the river ahead, freezing under the moonlight, a path to a world where her child could eat, sleep, and grow without fear. She gathered scraps, hiding them carefully for the journey she dared not yet speak of aloud. Her baby's cries became both a burden and a reminder of why she must risk everything. Her hands, raw from work and hunger, meticulously repaired an old shawl to wrap him in warmth. She studied the small creek nearby, noting the shifting ice, the swift currents. Every detail mattered. One misstep could mean death. The village was silent but vigilant. Even a mother's whispered plan could be reported. Gien knew that neighbors, while sympathetic, were themselves prisoners of fear. One wrong glance, one accidental revelation, and the Korean soldiers would descend. Yet the thought of the river of air, untainted by fear and hunger, gave her courage. At night she clutched her baby to her chest, whispering, "We will cross. We will be free." Each syllable was both a vow and a shield against despair. The border was no longer a rumor. It was a living dream, terrifying and beautiful, shimmering at the edge of her world. Survival had taught her patience, stealth, and endurance. Now it demanded courage. As moonlight touched the icy river in the distance, Jian took a deep breath. Hope was dangerous, but the alternative, watching her child wither in hunger and fear, was unacceptable. She would risk everything for that fragile, golden life pressed against her heart. The river awaited. The moon hung low, silver and cold, casting a pale light across the frozen river. Jian clutched her baby tightly, every fiber of her being alert. The wind bit through her thin shawl, and the icy ground crunched beneath her careful steps. One slip could send her tumbling into the freezing water. One sound could alert the Korean soldiers patrolling the far bank. Ahead, she noticed a figure crouched among the reeds. Heart pounding, she froze, instinctively shielding her child. The figure moved hesitant, wary. Jian realized it was a man, also peering toward the river, dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes reflecting fear and desperation. Perhaps another villager seeking freedom more, perhaps a trap. In North Korea, strangers could be spies, selling information to survive. "Don't scream," he whispered in broken tones, a hint of relief in his eyes. Jian nodded, her lips pressed to the baby's head. The man offered a small bundle of bread, and she took it cautiously, savoring the crumbs that had never tasted so sweet. They shared no words about where they were going, only the silent understanding that this night held life or death. Suddenly, a faint rustle in the snow Korean soldiers. Ch! Jian's pulse surged. She crouched, dragging her baby close, as searchlights skimmed over the frozen riverbank. Her heart hammered, her breath shallow. Every step, every heartbeat was a gamble. The man gestured toward a narrow patch of ice, cracked but passable. Jian's fingers froze around her baby as she carefully placed one foot, then another. Her stomach twisted, not from cold, but from fear. If they fell, if the ice broke, the river would claim them both. Time stretched. Every rustle, every glint of light made her flinch. And inch by inch, she moved forward, drawing courage from the warmth of her child, from the hope that freedom might finally be within reach. And then, a shout echoed across the riverbank. The soldiers had spotted movement. Jian's chest tightened. She held her baby close, whispering prayers no one could hear. The night trembled with possibility and terror. Survival demanded more than courage, it demanded a miracle. And tonight, that miracle would either embrace them or shatter everything they had fought for. Jian's heart pounded as the searchlights glared across the frozen river. The baby squirmed weakly against her chest, tiny fingers gripping her shawl. One wrong move, one slip on the ice, and they would fall into the freezing currents below. She inched forward, listening to the crunch of her boots over thin ice. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the river. Gin froze. Her stomach sank as she realized that the patch of ice under her foot was breaking. Panic surged. The river's icy grip was a deadly predator, ready to claim anyone who dared challenge it. She clutched her baby closer, whispering frantic reassurances. She didn't entirely believe herself. Behind her, the Korean soldiers' shouts grew louder. Flashlights danced over the snow, their beams sharp and merciless. The man she had met at the reeds tried to signal, urging her forward, but the ice groaned and splintered beneath them. Fear and determination waged war within her. The baby's soft whimper cut through the night, a tiny plea for survival that ignited a desperate courage in her heart. With trembling hands, Jian carefully shifted her weight, moving inch by inch. Ice cracked beneath her boots, sending splinters of cold water splashing upward. She nearly slipped, the baby's cry piercing the frozen night. She pressed him against her chest, using every ounce of strength to steady herself. To force forward despite the bitter cold, despite the fear, the Korean soldiers' voices grew closer. She could hear the crunch of their boots over the snow, see their rifles glinting in the beams of light. Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed for retreat, for safety, for survival. But retreat meant death for hope. Freedom was just ahead, tantalizing and fragile. With one final push, Jian reached the far side, ice splintering beneath her, but holding just long enough. She stumbled onto solid ground, collapsing with her baby in her arms. Tears streamed down her face, not just for the terror endured, but for the life still clinging to hers. Behind them, shouts and angry curses faded as the soldiers stopped at the river's edge. The baby stirred weakly, eyes blinking up at her. And for the first time, Jian allowed herself a shuddering breath of relief. They had survived the river, for now. In that frozen, dangerous night, she realized that survival was not only a matter of stealth or courage, it was a testament to love. Every step, every heartbeat had carried them closer to hope. And though the road ahead was uncertain, it was theirs to walk. Dawn broke over the snow-covered hills, pale and trembling. As Jian pressed forward with her baby wrapped tightly against her chest, every village they passed seemed abandoned, frozen in time, the remnants of life frozen beneath the harsh North Korean winter. Smoke curled from a distant chimney, but she dared not approach. An unfriendly face could be a trap. Any door could hide Korean soldiers. Her legs ached, muscles burning from the long march, yet she forced herself onward. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, cold seeped into her bones, and every step carried the weight of fear. But the baby's warmth, his tiny heartbeat pressed against hers, was a beacon she could not abandon. Each weak whimper reminded her that the child's survival was the only reason she still moved. They passed villagers quietly gathering firewood, eyes darting suspiciously, lips sealed by fear. Gian understood their silence. Every whisper could be reported, every glance noted. One misstep, and the Korean soldiers could descend without warning. Survival meant invisibility, and she had mastered it with grim determination. At night they hid in abandoned barns and under snow-laden trees. Gian whispered to her child, telling him stories of freedom, of rice bowls overflowing in warm beds, tales that seemed distant and impossible. The journey was exhausting, dangerous, and filled with the constant threat of capture, yet the small moments of shared warmth kept them alive. In one village, she encountered an elderly woman who offered a small cup of broth. Fear flared in Jian's chest. Could she trust this kindness? The woman's eyes were weary but kind, a rare glimmer of humanity in a land suffocated by oppression. Gian accepted the gift with trembling hands, her gratitude hidden beneath practiced caution. Every step brought her closer to the distant border, closer to freedom, but the road was fragile. A thin thread stretched over the abyss of fear and death. With every village they passed, Gian clutched her baby tighter, whispered promises of safety, and walked onward. Love had brought them this far. Courage kept them moving, and hope, fragile yet persistent, lit the path through North Korea's shadows. The forest opened up to the river's edge, silver and silent under the moonlight. Jian's breath came in short, cold bursts as she pressed her baby closer, each heartbeat echoing in her chest like a drum of hope and fear. The border was just ahead, the invisible line between the suffocating grip of North Korea and a world that promised food, warmth, and safety. Every step had been earned through exhaustion, hunger, and terror. Her legs trembled, muscles screaming in protest, but she could not stop. One slip, one sound, one misjudged step could undo everything. She remembered the Korean soldiers, their harsh voices, the glare that had followed her like a shadow for days. She forced herself to focus, to move silently, to be invisible. The river, freezing and unforgiving, stretched before her. A few unstable ice patches offered passage, but each one was a gamble, fragile underfoot. Gian adjusted the baby in her arms, whispered softly, "We are almost there, little one." His small fingers curled around hers, fragile yet alive, and she drew courage from that tiny grip. As she stepped onto the first patch of ice, it groaned beneath her weight. Her heart leapt. A crack ran through the frozen surface, splintering like glass. She held her breath, careful, calculating, inching forward with deliberate care. Behind her, the distant shouts of Korean soldiers reached her ears, the sound both terrifying and distant, as if the danger was both near and far. Finally, with one last effort, she reached the opposite shore. Solid ground. Safe ground. Tears blurred her vision as she sank to her knees, cradling the baby to her chest. His eyes blinked up at her, wide and trusting, and in that moment all the hunger, fear, and suffering melted into relief. Jian looked back toward the darkened river, toward the land she had escaped, the country that had tried to crush her spirit. She did not look forward to triumph or joy. There would be struggles ahead, but for this moment, she had survived. Love had carried them through the impossible. Courage had guided their steps. Hope had led them to the edge of freedom. Holding her child close, she whispered into the cold night, "We are alive, or free." And for the first time in her life, she believed it.